Good evening, everyone. That's a very well-behaved crowd. That's great. And it's fantastic to see so many people here. And new chairs are being brought in. And there's a queue all the way down Tottenham Court Road, which is fantastic. My name is Sunan Prasad. I'm the chair of Article 25. And it's my huge pleasure to welcome you for this evening's talk. To hear about a really wonderful project and a fantastic building that I've loved from when I saw the designs, and even more after the photographs by Grant Smith, who will be joining the panel later, and the movie as well, which is on the website, which I'm sure many of you have seen. Huge thanks to the NLA for hosting tonight, just as they hosted earlier talks on Article 25's work and the discussions as part of this Make Design Matter series, because we do depend on grants, donations, amazing fundraising efforts to do our work. I'm sure I have a sneaking feeling everybody here knows what Article 25 is, but I will just tell you, for those in case they missed it, it's a humanitarian architecture charity that uses really state-of-the-art design and project management to work with, and I really mean work with, vulnerable communities around the world to provide livelihoods, to provide healthcare and education and housing, to help through design make lives far better than they might be without that design. Not that they would still survive and maybe even partly flourish, but we think that this approach that we have to designing is very special, and it makes a huge difference, which is what you're going to hear about today. We're going to hear from Bea and Matt about the Bethel School in Gourcy in Burkina Faso. And then we're going to have a chat with two more panel members and audience participation. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Bea Sennewald, our Director of Projects. Bea.
Well, welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming to hear about Article 25's work. And I don't want to start without some special thanks to my colleague Abul Mati, who has been organizing this series. We're having these lectures once a month, showcasing not only our work, but also the work of any other architects who are doing humanitarian projects. And this is actually the 4th or 5th of a series which will keep going on through this year. So look out for talks once a month if you're interested in the subject. You've already heard from Sunant. My colleague Max Sati is a structural engineer who helped us on this project, and he will be part of the presentation. This is about the Bethel School in Gourcy in Burkina Faso. And just a few words about Article 25. We take our name from the 25th article of the International Declaration of Human Rights, which was drafted as part of the United Nations founding, and as far as we've heard, the text originated with Eleanor Roosevelt, who is a particular hero of mine. And who we are and what we do professional architectural services, and we also manage construction. So we take a project from the very first idea until it is ready to move in. And we work on sustainable buildings and leverage the money that is going to be spent on construction so we can improve the economics of the local environment that we work in. We work in healthcare, in education, and disaster risk reduction, and often in the context of rebuilding from a disaster, which might be a typhoon or an earthquake, or possibly even some kind of war or civil strife. We work in many countries. I think it's 34 at last count, and we've done something like 90 projects in 12 years since the charity was founded. We have a lot of people who contribute to our work, particularly engineers, structural engineers, electrical, mechanical engineers, civil engineers, but also people who give us work in kind, such as publicity, and the BRE Trust who support this series. And we work with a lot of organizations on the ground. In fact, one of our prerequisites for starting a project is that there is somebody on the ground who is already delivering healthcare or education. We never want to build any buildings that are going to be empty and that won't serve a purpose. So the Bethel School in Gourcy, Burkina Faso probably raises quite a few questions. Burkina Faso, it's a landlocked country in West Africa in a region that's called the Sahel, and I think Sahel is an Arabic word meaning beach. But it's not a beach for an ocean, it's a beach of the Sahara Desert. So it's on the edges of the Sahara. And it is a very dry area, suitable for livestock and for growing a little bit of crop, but not very much. It has no oil, it has no minerals, and therefore it is not a wealthy country. It falls number 183 out of 187 on the Human Development Index. It has a population of 20 million, and about half of them are under 15 years of age. The nominal income is just under $800 per year, and 43% of the population live under the poverty line, which means they have less than $1 a day. And if you look at the entire population, the average number of schooling is only 1.5 years. Now that's everybody, not just young children, but even older people, and that's quite a shocking number. But if we look at children who are of school age, actually, encouragingly, even in 2008, 2/3, slightly better than 2/3 of boys and girls were in primary school. And in secondary school, though, only about 1 in 5, and even less for girls. In the last 10 years, that's changed. So now there's about 3/4 of children in primary schools, and about 29% of children attend secondary school. That's still less than 1 in 3, but it's a huge improvement. It's doubled the girls' enrollment and increased the boys by about 50%. And this school in Gourcy is part of that movement. It's a long way to go still before we get to 100%, which is, of course, where we should be. So a little bit about the project itself. The prime movers behind this project are Craig Goldblatt, who's shown here on the right with a basketball. He is a speaker and also was very moved by poverty in Africa to do something about it, and decided to build a model school that could possibly be replicated in many other places in West Africa. And his counterpart on the left is Pastor Jacques Ouedraogo, who works for the Association Evangélique d'Appui Développement, which is a French evangelical. Well, it's not French, it's an evangelical church, but they speak French because we are in a former French colony, and that is still the official language of the country. So those two work together. The AEAD, which is a mission, already runs a school on the site, or ran it when the project started, which was about in 2010. And they also run 33 other schools in the country, so they're very experienced at providing education. And the reason for building a school in this specific place was that they were turning children away. There was not enough room. They couldn't cover the last years of high school. And they didn't have really any good sports facilities, and girls were dropping out at quite an alarming rate. So the way Article 25 go about design is to first establish a need, and we do that very much with the community involved. That's the children themselves, the parents, the teachers, and we decide what it is that's actually needed. And you see here in the circle all the things that could be provided, and then in a graph done in a Western way. But you will notice that you don't have to read or write. You can vote with a pebble or with a stick on what you want. And another thing that we've tried to find out during this process of engaging with the community is what can we do that's over and above the basic purpose of the project. Now here the basic purpose is the school. And interestingly, this community decided that a really important thing was to have a functioning well. The well you see on the right was there, but it wasn't functioning, it was disused. So we said, okay, we'll take that on, and there will be a proper well when we're finished. The site was analyzed, not just by us, but this is the community of women, they mapped it, and there's another men's map, and there's a children's map. And then, of course, there's the Article 25 site analysis, which you might recognize more, that tells you the sun path, that tells you where the wind is coming from, where the traffic is, the way we tend to analyze sites in the Western country. Something that's interesting, the architects who went out there, who were Robin Cross and Graham Paring, also measured the temperature in the existing school and noticed that it was between 35 and 37 degrees in the classrooms upstairs, which is rather hot. And this was in the coolest month of the year. So in the hotter months, it would be quite a bit hotter than that. And the reason for that is this tin roof. It's an uninsulated piece of steel, and it just picks up the heat and sends it right through, radiates it onto the children and the teachers. Another thing that we did during the feasibility study, and we do on every project, is look at what is available in terms of materials. What can we use? We don't use anything that you can't buy locally. And why not? Because if anything ever breaks, you have to be able to repair it, and you have to be able to work with what is available in the local market. We found a lot of different masonry materials that we could work with. We found some louvers that we could use for windows, some door handles, and now you can find solar panels everywhere as well, which is very helpful. We also do a skills audit and find out who in the community might know something about construction and could help in the building. And they could not only work on the project, but they could also train their fellow community members who are unskilled and bring them along so they have a skill in construction for future job opportunities. A few words about the design, which is extremely simple. We took advantage of the road that runs along the right side of the slide here, because there was already a nice row of trees that provide shade, and under those trees were some market stalls, so there was already a good bit of community activity. And because of that, as Graham Paring told me, we located the buildings near to the road and put the sports field on the far side. So the project consists of classrooms, vocational classrooms, because not everybody is on an academic track, and vocational skills are really needed in Burkina Faso. And also has a kitchen, which, as you will see, is a very important function in the school. It has a library, has computer rooms, and it is built quite simply. And the section is a good way to explain that. We have concrete foundations, we have masonry walls, and a steel roof. And I'll explain a little bit about what the specific functions of these elements are. It's a difference. Almost every building in Africa has concrete foundations, masonry walls, and a steel roof, but this is not quite the same. The masonry, first of all, is made from laterite, which is a weathered rock that is very pervasive in the tropics. Between 25 degrees north and south, about 1/3 of the Earth's surface has laterite. It's not used very much, but it is extremely expensive, and it is inexpensive, and it is actually very useful. It has some very good properties. And the layer of laterite can be up to 30 meters thick. So there is quite a lot of good building material stored below the surface. Its unusual characteristic is that it's hard, it's very soft when you first expose it and cut it. So it can be cut with hand tools, and then it dries and hardens. It cures basically with oxygen, and then becomes very hard, a stone that you can build with. So another good characteristic it has is if you look at embodied energy of an earth brick, a fired brick, a concrete block, or a laterite block, you see the earth brick of the embodied energy, for those of you who are not architects, means it's the energy that's required to actually fabricate the material. So an earth block is about 0.5 megajoule per kilogram. A fired brick, because you have to put it in a kiln, is about 5 times that. A concrete block, about twice as much as the earth brick, mainly because it contains cement, which is a high energy user, and a laterite block is 0. That's if it's dug and cut with hand tools, which in the case of this project it was. So literally no embodied energy in the material that was used for the walls. Now the environmental design, this place is never cold. There are plenty of places that are hot and cold, but this one is never cold. It's hot in the winter, in the 30s, and it is even hotter in the spring and summer, in between 43, 48, 49 degrees centigrade. So what we need to keep this cool, because air conditioning is out of the question, and we don't actually think one needs to use it because we can build without it. What we need is good cross-ventilation and a warm material that doesn't store too much heat, because anything that has a high thermal mass will absorb the heat in the daytime and re-radiate it at night, and it'll be hot all the time. But laterite is very good for that because it has a lot of air cavities, and it doesn't have a thermal mass of a brick or a concrete block. And the other thing we did was we used the steel roof that's slanted, and it actually has 2 layers to the roof, a flat layer and then the slanted steel layer. And it produces a Venturi effect because the wind comes in on the narrow side and comes out on the wider side, and it enhances the velocity, so it actually moves through there faster, and because of that, it cools the space below. The predicted temperature, this is with some fancy CFD modeling, computer fluid dynamics, is indicated by the heavy green line. So it says that we could probably achieve about a 32, 33 degree temperature in a classroom on a day when it was about 43 or 44 degrees outside. And this is quite a daring assumption, and we'll see very soon if it's actually true. So a few words on the structural design from Mac. If you'd like to come up.
Thank you, Bea, and thank you all for being here. My name is Mac Sati. I'm a structural engineer at MHA. My colleagues who actually worked on this project, including Michael Haddy, can't be here tonight, so I'm here presenting on their behalf. As a team, we're all very proud to have worked on the Burkina Faso School, which is a fantastic project. and we'd like to thank Article 25 and the Building Centre for hosting tonight's event. The structure of the school is actually very simple, and as Bea said, it uses locally sourced materials and labour to develop skill and capacity. Some of the materials used include the laterite, which are sourced from a quarry, and plain and reinforced concrete, as well as mild steel for the roof. The picture you see at the front is from Grant Smith, just thought to give the credit. And there's some sketches on the right, which are quite early stages where we looked at ceiling study, and I believe it's a laterite block on the left. So one of the initial challenges on the project was actually obtaining information on the site, just simply getting data. It's things we take for granted here. So we found it very difficult to find, or hardly any contractors really, who could do geotechnical investigations. And it's normally one of the first things we do on site. Even simple tests were quite difficult. We knew anecdotally that the laterite was extensive and that the site was underlain by it. So in the end, we actually just did some trial holes which confirmed that, and we worked with low bearing pressures to keep the design safe, and it was all we could do. It helped that the planned dimensions of the elements were quite wide, so that the pressures were generally low. On the right, there are some foundations being poured, which are plain concrete predominantly. On the left, that's I believe the latrine, which has some reinforced concrete, which is the hole you can see there. And the reason it's reinforced is because it retains some of the earth. The laterite pillars, a bit deceiving because they're actually infilled with reinforced concrete in the middle. At the early stages of the project, we were looking to build the pillars from laterite only, but that was based on the concept that we would have a heavy roof in the ceiling. We were quickly finding that without that, the laterite just couldn't handle the forces. It is a great material, but in technical terms, it was variable, and it ranged from being hard to being soft and friable. You can see one of the pictures, a builder is shaping the block with a pickaxe. Some of the forces that the pillars had to deal with included tying down the roof, which from what I know, we struggled to keep down because of its large surface area, the overhang, the ventilated void all meant that the uplift from the wind was actually significant. And I should say that the wind was actually another thing we struggled to find data on. There's no standards you can use to derive loads, so we used wind speeds and compared against UK wind speed to derive design loads. So that was one thing, and the other thing was that they basically stabilized the building in the long axes. You can see a lot of openings, and I think the next picture will maybe show that clearer. Oops. Right, so on the bottom right is a plan, and you can see we don't have many shear walls in the long axis, so we actually use the pillars to stabilize the building in that direction. And again, it sort of drove us towards a reinforced concrete infill, which could do that quite easily while keeping the laterite appearance. And in this case, if I go back, the laterite actually served as formwork for the concrete, so it was quite easy to then stick the bars in and pour it.
Describe the glass.
Sorry? Oh, sorry, I forgot. I was going to say we did a very sophisticated test in the office. I don't really know what the results were, but my guess was that we put some laterite in that glass and it disintegrated slowly. I think it was just that we were concerned about the strength. It's equivalent to a very weak block, basically. But I know it can be harder, depends on the process. The pillars are then connected to a ring beam at the top, or capping beam, which is a reinforced concrete, and that has several jobs. Again, very simple concept, but it formed as a lintel and also restrained the pillars, and it transferred the windlows into the solid laterite shear walls, which don't have any reinforcement in. And that brings me on to the roof trusses. The roof trusses are, I think, at a maximum of 1.3 meters high. They are made from steel angles, which are doubled, I believe, and they span approximately 9 meters and overhang by 1.3 meters. We initially detailed the connections to be bolted because we thought we'd get more control that way, and it's easier as well. But I think in the end, virtually all the connections were welded on site. I did find some pictures of the welding in action, but I didn't include them. The lack of safety gear, I thought, might be a bit disturbing for some of you. And that's it for me. Thanks.
Okay, here's some early visualizations of what it might look like. Just a couple, including some people playing football. And then we go into construction. We always, and a very important part of our way of working, is we always send a site architect or engineer to site who is there to supervise and make sure the construction is to a quality standard that will actually last, so the building does not fall apart. We expect the same standard that we would expect here in terms of quality. And that person also monitors the training programs for the unskilled workers and also women who are brought onto projects to make sure that that really happens. So here you see the foundations going in. Oh, in this case, we had a very experienced architect who's actually semi-local. His name is Kodjo. He's from Ghana originally. You can see him on the left in the background. And he lives in Burkina Faso, and he loved this job. He did a just superb job supervising. And you see the foundations going in, and the first masons laying up a wall and training some of the people from the village. On the left is a sample panel. This is something for those of you who are architects will be familiar with. We do this in the UK as well. It sets up the quality standards, so then if it's up to that standard, all the construction references to that. But in Africa and in Asia, it has an additional function because many of the people working on the project are not able to read drawings. So if they see that panel, they see how the building elements connect together, and they understand how it's to be built. So it has that second function as well. Oops, I forgot about digging the pit for the latrine. We have latrines on this project. It dug into a trench, and here you can see how the earth is quite stable. You can dig practically straight down. And then using concrete block for the retaining walls, you cannot use laterite in contact with liquid, so that couldn't be made from laterite. And you also see the ring beam getting poured here and some of the louvers that are used for the windows. The windows, incidentally, have no glass. It's just louvers, and the doors as well. So they're not solid. The air goes right through them. And then you see the steel roof going up. And a little bit of some really nice quality. We have a very good contractor who takes pride in his work. And there's beautiful concrete work in these steps, and that drainage ditch, the way that detail works is really nicely done. And the latrines as well, when they're finished, they look quite comfortable. And then we get to the grand opening, a big celebration, everyone came. And how did it turn out? We now have facilities for double the number of students. We're up to 950, and there's probably 1,000 there, I suspect. And the school is running well. Here you see a picture of what it looks like from the road. Some homework areas outdoors in the shade. The new classrooms, quite bright. And basic sports facilities. And notice there is sports not only for boys, but for girls as well. And here's a quick look of what they think of.
Un comptable. En première, deux. En plus, j'aime la classe même. Puis c'est les fenêtres. Sincèrement dit là, c'est très intéressant. On se sent à l'aise quand nous sommes dans les classes. Ces classes me favorisent parce que quand j'ai un devoir, je reste à midi pour bosser dans ces salles. Et puis, sincèrement, le rendement là, c'est beau. Lors des devoirs, là,
Nana, simplement N-A. Yeah. N-A. Français. French. Bien sûr, c'était mon métier de rêve. Les nouvelles salles, très confortables. C'est juste à côté. Confortable, la position des fenêtres, même si les cours c'est de 10h à 12h, on est à l'aise. Avec la chaleur, on ne s'ennuie pas, quoi.
Je m'habite à Tangaï, c'est 10. Je me lève en police. Bon, je peux dire que quand nous étions, quand il y avait la cantine, si les 12 heures, comme il y a la faim, on ne peut pas apprendre. Mais il y a des jours où on donne 100 francs. Si on donne 100 francs, on part au marché, acheter à manger. S'il n'y a pas 100 francs, on reste comme ça.
Notice how important the food is. The kitchen is actually probably one of the most important elements in that school because, as you could probably guess, a lot of the children don't get to eat in the morning and they come to school and that is their meal of the day and then they get to eat at home at night, but maybe not always. So that's something we really watch out for everywhere in Africa and Asia also. Make sure there is a facility to serve food. Now, on to evaluation. The project has now been built for 5 years. It was finished in 2014, and this is a good time to go back and see how well everything's worked out. We've teamed up with the Building Research Establishment and the University of Bath to go back and find out what has actually happened. One thing we're going to test is how well does the environmental concept actually work? What are the real temperatures? What is the air movement? How does it compare to other buildings? How does it compare to the outdoors? And also, how well did the building fabric hold up? Walls, windows, are there any problems, anything with maintenance that should have been done better? And we've sketched out some places to put sensors for thermometers and for anemometers to measure air velocity. And we'll also come up with a program to have a look at economic and social impact. And here are some of the questions that we're asking ourselves and that we'll be asking of the students and the graduates when we're on site, to see what impact the project has had in terms of opportunities for the children as well as for the workers who built the school. And just a quick afterword, which is continuing the model. The school was supposed to be a model for schools in West Africa, and it turned out it actually did spawn a second project. Homer and Adamu Kombo, who own a school in Niger, saw this school and said, we would like to expand our school and we want something similar. So we have been working on their school for the last, I don't know, quite a few months. The school is in the capital of Niger, in Niamey, and if anything, Niger is even poorer than Burkina Faso. It literally comes last in the index of countries for development. Also in this school, we have a master plan for 20 new classrooms, a library, computer rooms, a guardhouse, really quite a bit of expansion. Here you see what it's like now, and phase 1 and 2, completion will look like that, and phase 3 will look like this. We presented the design to the students and teachers in November, and this is what it looks like. It's very similar to the Gourcy school. The only thing that's substantially different is the way the roof is done. The inner roof is not flat. It's made from what's called jack arches, so that is also laterite going in an arch. And then we have the same flying steel roof over it. But not all buildings have the flying steel roof, which turns out in Africa is not inexpensive. It is much cheaper to just build with laterite masonry. So the administration and the guard's house and a few other buildings don't have the steel roof. They have vented gable ends, and they're built so with landscaping, so they're under trees. So we're hoping that those will be comfortable as well. How we're doing this, we're using the same contractor who knows about laterite, who's put in a very good bid, and who also has agreed to work with young graduates from the vocational program in Niger and an organization called FACT Sahel Plus to start laterite masonry in the country and to start to build businesses. So these young men and women will be trained on the project and will hopefully be capable to start their own construction firms when the project is finished. And this takes us to the end of the presentation and the panel discussion. Sunan?
Well, that was a wonderful presentation. Just to introduce the panel, I think you already know, but Ola Oduku is the professor of architecture at University of Manchester with a special research prowess in housing in Africa.
It's actually school design in Africa.
School design in Africa.
I've just written a book on it.
Okay, you've written a book on it. And B, you've already seen, Mac, you've already seen Grant Smith is the photographer and great supporter of Article 25, fellow cyclist and bon viveur. And it's great to have you. I've got a Brompton too. You got to have. You got what?
I have a Brompton as well.
Do you? Oh, well, that's a good thing to have. So I want to just kick off with starting the conversation, but please all think of questions. Think up your questions, and we'll have at least half an hour, I think, because they were so timely in doing your presentation, which is lovely. I think I just also want to say that there's something very nice about this project, which is that the idea of the double roof in this sort of form comes from a native of Burkina Faso, which is Francis Kéré. So I think we should say that and acknowledge our debt to his architecture in forming this one, but of course in our own way and with laterite and all those other things. So can I ask you? I think we'll start with Ola, since you're nearest to me.
I'm in the departure lounge. I'm afraid I might leave.
Do you just want to
soon.
make some,
Yeah.
and obviously you need to leave early,
Yeah.
but do you just want to say something about it? I mean, do you just want to make some extempore comments? I think that would be, rather than me asking you a question.
Yeah, I think, it's been a really interesting project to look at. I was sort of emailed about 10 days ago, and I said, well, if I can, I will. And it's really nice to look at the project and see the video, which I think you should all do. I think obviously we have to look at the development context, and as has been said, Burkina Faso is one of the poorest countries in the world. Education, as we know, as Article 25 says, is probably after shelter the most important thing that will improve development of countries. I think the critique will always be we're still building schools in the emerging world. But in some ways, if governments aren't going to do it, somebody's got to do it. I think what's important, though, is that we look at these materials and we indeed begin to work with them. I sort of looked quizzically at the designs because actually, just down the road from here was the Architectural Association School of Tropical Architecture. And I don't know whether people realize, but the curve of the next school is actually one of the designs of Pat Wakely, who till, 20 years ago was part of the development planning unit. So in some ways, I think the issue is that it's important that we do not necessarily reinvent the wheel, but also acknowledge what research has been done in the past, and actually make sure that as you're revisiting of the original project is going to do, find out what happens to all this knowledge, because the knowledge isn't actually that new. It's actually making sure that with the knowledge, these schools are rolled out much more. The idea about the model school program started with UNESCO in the 1948, 1950. So a lot of these things have already been in place. I think what's important about the work that Article 25 and other humanitarian organizations do is that in many ways they step into the place of whatever governmental organizations and so on should be doing. But the question to Article 25, I think, which is valid, is that they do need to work more with the organizations on the ground. I mean, I think the idea that in Burkina Faso, if you're in a rural area, your chances of getting an education are still near zero has a lot to be said about the world that we live in at the moment. But I think certainly it's a very, very good program. I like the use of materials, although I would ask again, so was that latrite that wasn't stabilized? Because again, the BRE championed the research into laterite blocks using stabilization elements with the bits of cement, which would actually respond to the engineers' problems about friability and so on and so forth. So even looking at the materials is something that maybe you looked at.
Okay, we've ranged widely from the education system to the stabilization of concrete, so maybe we can just segment that a little bit. I'm so glad you mentioned down the road and the Department of Tropical Architecture, the AA, because I've often thought that that Article 25's work is a true continuation of what actually at that time London was the center of, and not and because people came from around the world to develop responses to, it's not even tropical architecture, it's just non-Western normalized architecture. Like there are other cultures, there are other climates, there are equally scientific ways to responding to other contexts. And I think that Article 25 carries that legacy and is developing it. And I don't think that it's sufficiently understood how amazing that is and how insightful, how it's a specialism in its own right. And at that time, it was acknowledged as a specialism. We don't need to call it tropical architecture anymore. We're going to call it something else. But it is it's intensely studied of the place in its own right. Now, should we have a quick break for concrete stabilization?
Yeah, sure.
Of laterite, and then we'll get back to other questions.
Okay, concrete stabilization. We love this. These are cement stabilized earth blocks. We try to use them on projects. The difference between that and laterite is that it's made from sifted earth. You add a little bit of cement, you add water, and you can study exactly. And as Ola pointed out, you can get very reliable, consistent data on the strength of a material like that. It is very nice. It is not that we don't use it. We do use it. We don't that often use laterite in its pure form as we are here, only when it is actually readily available and there to be used for almost no money. Then it does make sense to explore it. It does have the one thermal property that earth block does not have, because earth block is much denser, so it does soak up heat. And the other issue you have with earth block, which perhaps if you have worked in Africa yourselves, you will know. And that is that there is a perception problem to overcome. Many people, when at first told about earth block, don't want to use it. They say, that's mud brick. That's what our grandparents had and our great-grandparents. That's looking backward. We were modern. We want to be looking forward. We want a modern material. And they may even mumble, we want steel and concrete. And of course, those materials are completely unsuitable, and they weather, and they break down, and they're not to be used. But actually, we have a job ahead of us, which is to show that through architecture, we can do a modern, beautiful-looking building out of earth brick. Because the first perception is that's not what people want. And this perception is at least not as serious with laterite, because it's perceived as stone. So stone is a better material than mud brick.
You do have there are local dwellings made of laterite, though, aren't they?
They
and in fact,
in Burkina Faso.
Well, actually, in Gourcy as well. I think that there are photographs that I've seen of.
Yes,
pictures.
well, there were some.
Yeah.
There were some here.
Michael, the steel, in a way, I mean, the concrete and the steel are interesting, but let's leave the concrete aside for a minute. But the steel, I heard from Robin that actually that he would have rethought that the steel is not easily locally available, and it actually caused some issues. Is that right?
I'm not sure about that, but okay. There are a lot of sections that were used, and they were quite familiar with doing welds on site. They had people doing it. So in terms of how available it was, I'm not too sure about that. Maybe Bea will have a better insight. But I was just going to say about the laterite. I mean, it was a surprise to me as well, finding that it was infilled with concrete. But I think since we did this project, that we have gained more information about it. We have more data, and in Niger, we are actually using it more as a structural element. So the vaults that we're doing are laterite, and they are structural. And my colleague is currently looking at how we might construct them. These methods are old and sort of tried and tested, but slowly they're being forgotten, and sometimes by even local people. So we are trying to work with it and try and avoid going the easy route of putting that in. But as Bea said as well, it is an old material, and sometimes the perception on site is also not to use it.
Thanks.
But yeah.
Grant, just to bring you in here. So you went out there, and have you been there at least once? And you spent some time and kind of recorded life.
Yes.
Can you say something about that?
Yes, I did. I was just there for one visit. It was about a week that I was there. There was a few things that impressed me, but I'd never been to Africa before, and certainly not a nation like Burkina Faso, which had, as Bea outlined, all of those literacy issues and poverty issues, and they were extraordinarily generous people. But the other thing was the ambitions of the children. I interviewed about 4 or 5 students for that film, and the young boy, he wanted to be a police officer. The young woman, the young girl wanted to be an accountant, and all of these kids actually wanted to take occupations that would serve the community. You ask kids in London what they want to be, and they want to be on Top of the Pops, or they want to be famous, or whatever. They have very different ambitions, and I think that's informed by what surrounds them. And the kids in Burkina Faso actually recognised a need in their own communities. And I think the other thing too, I would just comment on the architect's drawings that Robin Cross showed me before I went out. And he talked about these tree-lined streets, and there were shady areas. Well, the trees have very, very thin leaves because it's so hot, and there is very little shade out there at all.
However, this building is, whereas in the previous building, the temperature inside was higher than outside, in this building, it is genuinely the other way around. And actually, one of the what that means is that children can spend more time in the building. So actually, the school year has expanded, and that's actually quite critical in dealing with the numbers of people who want to access education.
And the other thing, it also, the school day is also lengthened by those blackboards, which are on the outside of the classrooms, because a lot of these kids come from homes that, well, most of them, they have no electricity there. They need to have journeyed home, some of them making journeys 10 to 15 kilometres by bike. So by the time they get home, it's dark. They can't study at home, but that allows them to continue their study at lunchtime or immediately after school.
That was actually a question I was going to ask. That a lot of the research I do looks at the school as being much more than just the school. Often it is the hub for development, which is, again, one of the reasons why it is important that it's structurally sound. Because we know in the Caribbean and so on, if there's a major hurricane, oftentimes it is the school that people go to. Indeed, there's this bizarre or a bit sad situation in Dominica at the moment, that they had a latrine building program, and at the end of the hurricane, the latrines were the only things that were standing, oftentimes. So the school becomes a major structure for the community. But what I was going to actually ask was also, were you able to put the solar panels in and so on, so it has an extended life for the community out with the school time, the school period?
Yes, there are solar panels. There's an array of them, and there is electricity, and there are adult literacy classes attended by mostly 70% of the attendees are women. And those people who've only spent a year and a half in school on average are learning to read and write. I think the audience probably
Great,
has
okay,
a few
so now,
questions.
Audience, I'm sure you're burning to ask questions. We're going to take questions in threes. So,
I have a really quick question.
Yeah.
Solar panels on the roof? Where are they?
Okay,
the ground.
On the ground, aren't they?
Yeah,
they're not.
on the ground.
They're not on the roof. Okay, Adam.
I just had a question of the very first step, which is how do you pick where and who to work with? Do they know to contact Article 25, or are you going out in the field and looking for the areas you think are most in need and approaching the institution? So how is that first connection made between Article 25 and the school or territory that actually wants to build? Because there's so many places in need globally, not just in Africa, even in the West, and how do you kind of pick and choose, but how does that first partnership?
Yeah, thanks. We'll hold that in our heads. Another hand up somewhere. So.
I thought the roof solution was very simple and elegant. Did you see, after the building was constructed, any of the local folk deciding that they would do the same thing on their own houses or buildings, whether they're,
Good question. Thank you.
picking up the idea?
Okay, thanks. Anyone else? There was a hand up there. Yeah.
Does laterite is strong enough like heavy rain seasons?
Okay. Thank you very much. So heavy rain, laterite strong. Has it been replicated? And this very interesting question. Let's start. B, I'm sure you can. You have the answer to how we start projects.
I'll give it a try. Yes, the projects come from many different sources. We don't have a program that says we are going to focus on this region in the world, and this is where we're going from one project to the next. We are right now looking at doing something like that with a schools program for Africa that we're trying to shape. But this project, like many others, came to Article 25 by, in this case, by the person who wanted to do it, Craig Goldblatt. And a lot of things, even today, come to us because people find us. We have a good presence on the internet, and now even in remotest Africa and remotest Asia, people have mobile phones, and they find things. And there are connective organizations. One is called Global Hand, where people like Article 25 and others are listed, and we get a lot of requests. So then it's a question of sifting through them and seeing if the right partners are there, if they own the land, if they have a piece of land, if they're already teaching, they're already delivering healthcare. And then if that all comes together and the money can be found, then we go and do the project.
I think just worth saying that we do not fund construction. So the money that's raised by Article 25 is for the design, and we are heavily reliant on partner organizations to fund the construction. And that's one of the ways that we might help select partners, because in the end there needs to be a building. Did that answer your question? Yeah. Great. So, replicability and laterite. Well, I thought Mac might tell us about that. So is laterite okay in heavy rain, and to have these ideas being replicated?
I think from what I know, laterite has once it's dry, it has an irreversible process. Basically, it dries, it gets harder, it doesn't go back to being the soft clay consistency you get. So I imagine it would continue to get harder in weather.
As long as it's properly protected, which is the issue about having the overhang.
Which is the overhang, exactly.
Yeah.
So I think it'd be okay.
So laterite is used in many parts of the world. So, for example, in Mysore, in South India, I've seen laterite buildings. In fact, so much so that there's none left. So there is actually a slight worry here, which is that is this actually a finite resource or not? So I think that we just need to keep an eye on that. But I think you're exactly right. Once it's dug out and it's exposed to the air and oxygen, it changes structure and becomes hard, and so on. So have we seen this replicated locally?
I haven't been there yet, so but I am going to start the study in March, and we'll have a look around and see if anyone has adopted it. It would be quite interesting to see that.
I think one thing to remember is that organizations that might be able to afford to build institutions actually are already kind of slightly set in their ways. They may not replicate something like this. In fact, there's a fantastic photograph that Robin Cross showed me, who's, of course, one of the original architects of this, of a nearby building built in a modern way, where after a very heavy winds had its roof completely blown off, while this roof, which looks like it's about to be blown off, was absolutely steady. Thank you, Mac and Michael Haddy Associates. So, big round of applause. I mean, again, in a way, I just wanted to say that because Francis Carey had actually already introduced this idea. The double roof is a well-known thing in many ways. I think what the beauty of this is the way it's done. It's not that this is some kind of act of genius to invent a double roof, which has been done very, very beautifully earlier as well. So next set of questions, please. Wow, that's fantastic. Okay, there are 4, so we'll take all 4 from left to right. Please, sir.
Hi. Yeah, just in regards to sort of collaboration, because I mean, we're talking about Francis Carey, and then there are a few other architects, for example, Mass Design, that have done sort of similar projects. Have you thought of sort of having a collaborative approach between getting these other people on board, or sort of getting feedback from them and on how materials or the technology they've used can be incorporated in some of your projects?
Thank you. As it happens, Mass Design Group spoke at one of these events about 2 months ago, but we'll come back to that. You had a question.
I was wondering about your team structure. Can you explain if you work with environmental scientists and landscape architects as part of your team?
Okay, thank you. Collaborative team. And you, madam.
Mine is very prosaic. Going back to laterite and the roof. In the circumstance where the laterite is used to form the vaulted roof, does it need to be treated with something on top of it? So should it rain, or I'd rather get the sense that it doesn't rain very much, if it rains big, in Burkina Faso on that particular part of it. And then I'm also seized by your comment about steel and various comments about steel and whether or not it is a widely available material, and are there any alternatives to steel that could be used to perform the same function?
Understood. Lovely. And yes.
Obviously, health, shelter, and education are absolutely essential, and where the focus is going to be for a lot of projects to work on. I was wondering if you've had the luck or the opportunity, or if it's possible, if Article 25 has ever worked on creative buildings for music or arts or
okay. Great question. Okay, so I think B, you can talk about team structure, and Mac and B can talk about team structure and collaboration for a moment, and then we'll come to the others.
Okay, all right. Well, that one was easy.
Okay. Oh, no, can I ask you? Since Ola is about to go, Ola, is there anything you'd like to just add to what you've heard so far?
I would say keep supporting Article 25. But no, on a more serious note, from an academic perspective, I think more work with students, and also to Article 25, I say, even if there are no architecture schools in Burkina Faso, and I'm not really sure, because I did speak to Matthias Kerry and I didn't get a straight answer, there is a very good architectural school down the road at Kumasi. When you're doing this work, I think you really owe it to students in Africa to see what you do, because those are the next generation, and there are architects. Indeed, you were working with a Ghanaian architect on site. So I think it's the sharing and the collaboration, as my colleague there has talked about. But it's an excellent project, and good luck with the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay.
Okay, team structure. Okay, well, we work out of London. We have an office here. We have a small office in Myanmar because we have a couple of, especially one very large project there. There's about 25 of us altogether. And the way we work is in our own office, we have project architects who are fairly experienced architects, and we have part 1 and part 2 graduates. And they work mostly on a volunteer basis. They get a small stipend to help with their finances. And they commit to work with us for 6 months, and many of them stay for up to a year or even longer. And by that point, they are quite well trained in how a project comes together. They participate in everything, in all design meetings, client meetings, engineers meetings, setting up drawings, and we're told they're very employable when they leave Article 25. And we even have an alumni group. A lot of them come to events like this. So then, but that doesn't take care of the project, of course. We also work with structural engineers, services engineers, civil engineers, and many of them give their time pro bono, especially on projects like this, where there is not very much money to actually work with. We have one firm, Lee, Ashley Bateson is here today, and also a couple of the engineers. They have an engineer in our office 1 day a week, and they help us with any project that needs mechanical, electrical, plumbing, public health. We work with structural engineers like Michael Huddy, also Rambo, Bureau Happold, sort of spread over the different projects. And we also have civil engineers who get seconded to Article 25. And then we usually recruit people for the site architect role, which doesn't actually have to be an architect, can be an engineer. And that's also a volunteer job with expenses paid, but a fantastic opportunity to go to a place like this, or to Tanzania, or we're recruiting right now for Nepal. And those people don't have to come from the UK. They can come from the local country, as long as we can find somebody qualified who has the experience to produce the kind of building that we need to build.
Thank you. I haven't forgotten your question, sir, or the one about the laterite, but on the steel, it so happens that Robin Cross, who was the architect here, has miraculously appeared amongst us. So, Robin, you told me something about the steel and thought that actually maybe the next time it might not be steel, so...
Did I? Apologies for being late.
You weren't planning to come.
I wasn't planning to come. I've been at another meeting. I ran this project a long time ago when I was in Article 25. I'm now doing other things. But the question was what is wrong with the steel?
Yeah.
Okay, I can't remember that specific question.
You
but
said it was hard to get hold of.
Right, the point about building in a resource-poor environment is that you should be using the materials that are available locally, and you should be using materials that empower local builders to replicate what you've done again. There is no point investing a large amount of money in a building like this school if it's going to be a one-off. The whole point is that you can generate a whole new a whole new wave of relatively low cost but durable education or health infrastructure using these techniques. So laterite is an obvious example because you dig it out of the ground from around the corner, you chop it out, in fact, with a machete, leave it in the sun, it dries, and it's a brilliant material at very little cost. It does leave a hole in the ground when you've taken it out, so ideally you fish farm or something with that hole. The problem with the roof is that it's largely a treeless country, Burkina Faso. So a timber roof isn't gonna work. I think that steel was brought in from Togo or Côte d'Ivoire. I think
Togo.
Right, and so I mean there is an issue there that it's being brought in from quite a long way away, and that suggests that perhaps we need to find a form of roof which can work with materials that are more locally available. Or you find a way of kickstarting the small steel section industry in Burkina Faso.
Timber's a long way away.
No, timber you can't use.
No, but if you can import steel
I have
from
one.
Togo,
Yeah.
then surely...
Well, timber has two problems. Yeah. One is its scarcity, and the second is the termites. Yeah. So it's not an ideal material, and in fact there's a big movement across the Sahel now of timberless construction. Yeah. People think it is criminal to use timber for building when there is so little there, and it should really be used for reforestation, and you should grow trees and not use them for construction. There are quite a few passionate people about that, in Niger and Mali as well. And you can now, on this new one in Niger, we have smaller steel sections. It is, Michael Hadi at this time have analyzed it a little differently, and we're using a lot less steel per kilogram, per square meter on this new project. So it is much less expensive, but it is still expensive. There's no getting around that.
And a concrete roof is an option, but when you look at the production line of concrete and you see how many trees are burnt in order to create the cement in some other country in West Africa, usually Togo again, right. The environmental cost of concrete is enormous.
We already talked about that.
Right, so you've done
But what we can talk about is if you have a barrel vault, I think there was a question over there.
Yeah.
About,
so this is a great question. How do you we have had the opportunity in going to Niger to find barrel vaulted structures, quite a few of them, that are called Nubian Vaults, and they are built without centering, without any formwork, because they're laid at an angle, and then a little piece is put in going in the other direction, so that as you build it, the bricks are always resting sideways, sort of at an angle to the end wall, to the gable wall. And that is a technique that was almost lost, but has been sort of reawakened in Egypt and has traveled from there across the Sudan and into West Africa as well. So there's a good chance, we don't know yet for sure, but there's a good chance these vaults can be constructed with that technique. That's what we're hoping for. Because we are working with the organizations that are favoring this type of construction. I mentioned before the Sahel Fact Plus, that are really into this masonry, and that they want to educate the young Nigerians in both the masonry and the business of building buildings.
But actually, what is it covered with? Just
what it's covered with, this is important, you have to put mortar on it. Yeah. Because even though the laterite is chemically altered from the sun, it is still porous enough, it has air cavities to let water seep through. So you can't actually have it be rained on and downpour. So we essentially put swimming pool mortar on top of it, also made with laterite, but containing lime.
So back from technique to culture and interchange, let's talk a bit more about collaboration, not just as a design team, but across other people who have the same interests and knowledge.
Right.
So, how are we expanding this community of knowledge? I think that's exactly what Ola was also saying. It's held here. We've actually, Article 25 started with a very collaborative platform. In fact, Article 25 was effectively, when it was formed, Robin was there soon after, was a brokerage almost. You know, you had different architects. The idea was that London's full of architects. Why don't they give their design time? The fact is that the work they produced had to be completely redone in the office to a point where there was no point in them producing the work because there was a design office within Article 25 having to straighten it out. Because a commercial office in London cannot do what Article 25 does. And this has been the kind of the outstanding, I think, unique point about Article 25 is that it has rekindled this discipline that other people have been continuously engaged in, but not at this scale, to actually look much more closely at what really is going on the ground, to be able to read it and to then respond to it directly without prejudice, without all the baggage, especially aesthetic baggage, that a commercial practice might carry. So I think this is a very important, having started this, to disseminate it and to, because we are far from the only people interested in this, and how do we gather that community of knowledge, I think is a very good question. You don't have to answer it.
I think we can answer it a little bit. All the people who are part of this lecture series work on these kinds of buildings, and we have relationships with all of them. Some of them are about technical issues or models that you could use, also construction models, whether you hire a contractor or whether you just hire workers. People use different models, and we talk about them. So the reason they are in this lecture series is that we have relationships with them, including MAS, EVA, any number of people. We don't feel that we're in competition because there is so much need. There could be 3 times as many as there are, and we still would have enough work to do.
Just to expand Sunan's point about what we learned in the early years at Article 25 is that we would often get offered a design office, would offer us their resource. They would offer to design a school or a health clinic. And of course, every good architect thinks that they will design the culturally, environmentally brief, appropriate building for every single project. That's what we all think, because that's what we're programmed to think at university. And it's rubbish. It's completely wrong. All of our work in the UK is encoded with so many cultural, economic, technological factors which are drilled into us so deep we don't even know they're there. So when a commercial design office would give us a school design for rural Sierra Leone, it would be entirely undeliverable within the logistics and supply chain of Sierra Leone and completely unaffordable.
We won't say which this design office was, but they are very well known indeed.
I mean, we probably could. He's big enough to take it.
No. Be polite.
The point is that architects have a lot of very, very valuable, architects and engineers have a lot of very important, valuable skills, but they need to be immersed in the culture of an organization like Article 25 or others, where those skills are targeted in the right way. And that's the function of Article 25 and other organizations.
Great. Okay, last
Did
round
we
of
miss
questions.
a question?
No, I think
we got them.
We had steel, we had lateralized, we had team, we had collaboration. I think
it's about the place for music, art, culture.
Very yes, place for music and art. I wish. Can we pick it up in the next round? Last couple of questions, please, because we're going to close in 5 minutes. Over there, yes.
Is there any scope to get a broaden the message, maybe go out somewhere in India, Southeast Asia, somewhere like that?
Thank you.
I guess try out there, 5 minutes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And the last one.
How do you fine-tune the development process since you've done 90 projects? Is there sometimes you don't produce a building that gives us a process and how a community can take it further?
Sorry, so can you? How do you? Did you get it?
I think I got that.
Could you repeat that?
Well, I think having done so many projects,
Yeah.
have you refined the process of delivering appropriate projects in
Yes,
this?
we can
in the
answer
Global
that.
South?
Yeah.
Great.
Is that what you meant? Yeah.
Sorry,
Okay.
I'm a bit hard of hearing.
Yeah, we can.
So let's wrap that up also with the question about arts and so on. I'm going to come to Mac and Grant in a way, but Bea, do you want to say something about? We haven't had a art music department yet.
No, but music is being taught in some of the schools. I don't know that it is in this particular school, but in some places it is. Art, I'm not so sure.
I mean, is it interesting? I mean, actually, as it happens, somebody approached us at PNP, and we're doing a music, an art school. But I think because it doesn't immediately attract the charitable sector in quite the same way yet. You know, here there is a lot of charities doing arts and music, but actually in places of less wealth, it's not quite the same. But it would be fantastic.
It would be great.
In fact, didn't Mass show the building they showed was an art building a couple of months ago, wasn't it? I mean, who was here at the Mass presentation?
All of us.
Yeah, so a bunch of, well, it was, wasn't it? It was cool. Oh, should I use a mic? Yeah. Okay, I think I'm always talking too loud anyway. So on the point about refining the process.
Yeah, I can talk about that. It's actually, the process is very similar to what I described here today. And I think it's a sort of a testament at how well it had been developed, even by the time the school was started, which was in 2010, that we still essentially use the same process today. And it is very much focused, first of all, on figuring out what can be done. What will the land support? What is the right thing to do for the group of people? What can be added to the project that will create some cohesion for the community? That's an added value.
But Bea,
and then
sorry to interrupt.
all the other methods that I sort of explained, that is very much a lasting...
That's about refining the process, but is there another thing which is about actually replicability and scalability and being able to almost franchise it so that it becomes some... Because we're reaching very few people.
Well, you can, and we are with the African Schools program, we are thinking of doing exactly that. I don't know about franchising, but maybe we could involve a wider group of people in it and figure out exactly how to train everybody. But you still have the issue of making it climatically responsive to a fairly unique place, and also cultural. Not every community is the same. You know, just because everybody in West Africa speaks French doesn't mean they have the same culture. There are quite a few differences between Niger and Burkina Faso. So it's somehow making it adaptable, but not losing the overall picture. It's to be explored how far you can spread the inkblot and how many people you could get involved to make it work.
To that point, the question about other countries like Asia, I think that's an easy question to answer because we are...
We are there, yeah. We are. We are not just working in Africa. We're working in India and Nepal right now, and we have worked in Goa, Philippines, New Guinea. So there's no limit on the countries we work in.
Which actually plays to your point about, yes, we can scale up, but actually there are local particularities. But actually, wasn't there a program of 20 schools in Sudan at one time?
We've had, Article 25 has had several programs that aimed to introduce models of buildings that could be applied on a wider scale. And there's often a real pressure from donors and from ourselves to make the work apply more widely. But the challenge is that no two communities are the same. The resources available in one village are very different to down the road. And in countries where there isn't the strong government to distribute materials and things have to be built out of what's locally. If you want to see the dangers of wide-scale introduction of model buildings. Go to Sri Lanka, the area reconstructed after the tsunami, where lots of international agencies flew in and built their model home, their model school, their model health clinic, their model community centre, and most of them don't work. Because the model is not relevant to the location.
Thank you, but actually, in contrast, don't we have a potential project in Pakistan?
We do, yes, and that's for housing, and this is a project to build potentially 16,000 houses in the northernmost province of Pakistan, in the Himalayas, and on that scale, to deliver something like that within 5 years, it would involve prefabrication, and we have spent some time thinking about how you could build factories for that in the actual valleys where the houses would be built, and use the local population to pre-manufacture some framing, sort of enlarged IKEA style, and then take it to the villages where the houses would be built, but still have them finished on site by the people who live in them, because on anything like that, actually claiming ownership is really important, not just having somebody else put something on your ground and say this is now yours, but being able to customize it to your family and to the appearance that you actually want. So yeah, we have thought about it, and we may be able to execute this if they get it funded.
Thank you. And that builds on previous work done in
Yes, that builds on
Pakistan,
previous work
on earthquake-proof
done
housing.
8 and 10 years ago, probably by Robin or his team.
Yeah. Okay, Grant, any last, any thoughts you've had?
It was a fascinating project to see, and I'm so thrilled you're going to go back to evaluate it. And Robin, your comments and your, as I said, I talked about you earlier, and the drawings you showed me with all the trees that weren't quite there because it was so bereft of shade. But so thank you.
Mac?
No, I just thank the audience again. Thank you all being here and being part of this. I hope to be involved in the next one.
Thanks. So let's thank our wonderful panel with the dragooned Robin Cross as well. Grant, thank you, and Ola.